What's going on, guys? Evan Preco here. You are watching the SG1 Sports Big Ten Football Channel. In this video, we're going to recap all of the games that took place for Week 5 last weekend. And to start things off, we've got the Friday night game, number 12, Penn State at Maryland. And for Penn State stats, Sean Clifford went 26 of 31 for 398 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 1 interception. He also was their leading rusher. He had 7 carries for 54 yards, averaging 7.7 yards a carry, and a touchdown run. KJ Hamler was their leading receiver. He had 6 receptions for 108 yards, averaging 18 yards a catch, and 1 touchdown. As a team, Penn State ran the ball for 198 total yards, and they had 619 total yards of offense. For Maryland, I cannot say the same. Josh Jackson went 10 for 21 for only 65 yards, 0 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Anthony McFarland Jr. was their leading rusher with 9 carries for only 24 yards, averaging 2.7 yards a carry, no touchdowns. And Dante Demas Jr. had 1 reception for 18 yards, no touchdown, and he was their leading receiver. They only had 60 total rushing yards and only 128 total yards of offense. The final score of this game, Penn State 59, Maryland 0. And all I have to say about this is, wow. 2 weeks ago, I really thought that that Maryland was going to be one of the top better teams in the Big Ten. And so far over the past couple games, they haven't been. So it's just looking like, obviously we all know Syracuse is not as good as they were supposed to be in the preseason, but I really thought, a performance like that against any Power 5 team that Maryland had a few weeks ago, that says a lot about them. At least I thought it did, and it turns out that it might not, because they lost their last game to Temple, and now they're getting blown out at home by Penn State. And nothing against Penn State. They are a very, very good football team, very well-coached football team. James Franklin has done an amazing job there so far. And speaking of the coaching, one thing I noticed about Penn State when I watched the game was, even in the fourth quarter, when they're already up like 45, 50 to nothing, and just offensively and defensively, their fight, they're sprinting to the ball on defense. They're executing on offense. They're creating gaps. They're blocking well. They're sprinting all the way until the whistle blows. And I think that just says a lot about Penn State's character as a football team and about how hard they work and about the way they're coached. That's something that I think every Penn State fan should look at and should be very proud of when they look at how their football team has played so far this year, especially on Friday night. Penn State, they're ranked number 12 in the country, going and blowing out a team like Maryland, who a couple weeks ago was having a lot of momentum. It says a lot about them. I think that they're a very good football team. They hadn't played too well in the past few weeks. They had given up plays to teams that they normally don't give up plays to, but at the end of the day, they won. They're now 4-0. I'm very much looking forward to when they end up playing Ohio State, but that won't be for a while. Next week they have Purdue, and that looked like it could be another blowout. For Maryland, they play Rutgers, so that could definitely be a bounce-back game for them, and we'll see how they go. But yeah, not much to talk about this one. 59-0 was the final score, and it was blown wide open right away by Penn State. It was never even close. They didn't start off slow or anything, so completely dominant game by them. Next up, we've got Northwestern at number 8 ranked Wisconsin. And for this game, for Northwestern, Hunter Johnson started the game. He went 10 for 21. Only 59 yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions. He ended up getting hurt during the game, so Aiden Smith came in, and he was somewhat productive. He went 8 for 20 for 99 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. Drake Anderson was their leading rusher. He had 16 carries for 68 yards, averaging 4.3 yards a carry, and a touchdown run. And then Riley Lees was their leading receiver. He had 5 receptions for 59 yards, averaging 11.8 yards a catch, no touchdowns. As a team, Northwestern ran the ball for 97 yards, and they only had 255 total yards of offense. For Wisconsin, Jack Cohen went 15 for 24 for 113 yards, no touchdown, 1 interception. Jonathan Taylor had 26 carries for 119 yards, averaging 4.6 yards a carry and a touchdown run. And then Garrett Groshek, who was a backup running back for them, was their leading receiver. He had 4 receptions for 31 yards, averaging 7.8 yards a catch, no touchdowns. Wisconsin only ran the ball for 130 yards, and they only had 243 total yards of offense. The Badgers ended up winning this game 24-15. And I guess you can say that this was kind of a hangover game for them, considering how well they played against Michigan and how big of a win that was for them. You get an opponent like Northwestern, who is 1-2 coming in, now 1-3 coming out, and they probably didn't give them their best. It didn't look like they did. Jack Cohn didn't throw the ball as well as some people thought, but at the same time, Northwestern's a very well-coached team. Yes, they are very young, but at the same time, I mean, they're very well coached. Pat Fitzgerald is going to put those guys in the right situations, and he's going to have them play their best. But it's just unfortunate for Northwestern because they lost a lot of talent last year, so they're kind of stuck with who they have right now. This game was pretty close for the most part. I mean, the score was 7-3 Wisconsin at halftime. And then in the third and fourth quarter early, Wisconsin kind of blew it open 24-3. Northwestern came back a little bit and fought, and they scored a couple times to try and make it somewhat close, but in the end, they couldn't make enough plays, so they ended up losing only by 11 compared to when they were down by 21. Excuse me, they only lost by 9 compared to when they were down by 21. But yeah, I mean, the thing about Northwestern is I wonder if we're going to see the same thing we see every year. This is kind of the point now next week where you look at them starting to kind of fight and get better and win more games in conference play, because they always have a slow September, and they have this year. They're 1-3. They play Nebraska in Lincoln next week, and they're coming off a big loss. So we'll see how that happens. We'll see how that game works. For Wisconsin, they play Kent State next week, and so that should be an easy win for them. But yeah, I mean, a good win for Wisconsin. They definitely could have played better than they did. Jonathan Taylor could have run the ball better than he did. But at the end of the day, a win is a win for them, and they are 4-0 right now, and they've won 2 games in the Big Ten. We'll see how they get tested on the road coming up sometime soon. But yeah, good win for them, and they're looking to be pretty good this year, and they've got their heads in the right direction. Also, one thing for Wisconsin that I forgot to add is the way that their defensive line and linebackers played, and it was unbelievable. I've never seen a defensive line dominate a backfield and an offensive line as much as Wisconsin did. I mean, that defense played really well. They forced a fumble that went for a touchdown. They forced an interception that went for a touchdown, and a lot of that was because the quarterback got hit as he threw it. And then Chris Orr forced another fumble on a strip sack kind of toward the end of the game a little bit. And that defense is playing their hearts out right now. They played amazingly against Michigan. They played very well against Northwestern. They played really well in the 2 games before them, not giving up any points. And I think that they're on the right track to keep playing well. And, I mean, this defense could possibly bring them to the Big Ten championship game, but there's a lot of football to be played, so we'll see how that goes. Next up on the list, we've got Middle Tennessee State at number 14 ranked Iowa. Nate Stanley went 17 for 25 for 276 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. Torrin Young was Iowa's leading rusher. He had 11 carries for 131 yards, averaging just under 12 yards a carry, no touchdowns. And Tyrone Tracy Jr. was their leading receiver. He had 3 receptions for 85 yards, averaging 28.3 yards a catch, no touchdowns. As a team, Iowa ran the ball for 351 yards, and they had 644 total yards of offense. For Mid-Tennessee State, Asher O'Hara went 15 of 22 for 110 yards, no touchdowns, no picks. He was also their leading rusher, with 10 carries for only 33 yards, averaging 3.3 yards a carry, no touchdowns. And Jaron Pierce was their leading receiver. He had 6 receptions for 43 yards, averaging 7.2 yards a catch, and no touchdowns. Mid-Tennessee State only ran for 80 yards, and they only had 216 total yards of offense. The final score of this game, Iowa handled business. They won 48-3. And a good win for Iowa. They're continuing to rack up the wins. They're now 4-0, and they looked pretty dominant throughout the game. I think it was about, 27-0 when Mid-Tennessee scored their first and only points of the game. And then Iowa kept racking it up on them, and they won by 45. So, good win for Iowa. They're looking like a pretty solid football team right now. They're 4-0, and they've beaten good teams like Iowa State, and they've already beaten Rutgers, so they already have a Big Ten win in there. Next week, they've got Michigan and Ann Arbor, and that should be a good game. I'm very much looking forward to paying attention to that one. And then they've got Penn State after that. So they're going to be tested the next couple weeks. Iowa will definitely be not texted. They will be tested, and we'll see how they pull out about it. So play Michigan, Penn State after that. Those should be two very good games. And yeah, I'm very much looking forward to seeing how Iowa does this year. And I know that Mid-Tennessee State, obviously not a powerful football program, but they've done good things in the past. They usually play a few games a year against Power 5 teams, and they still managed to make a bowl game. So that's a decent program. And Iowa played them very, very well. So good win for them. They're 4-0, and they're going to be playing good Big Ten teams coming up. So we'll see how they are tested with that. Now we've got Rutgers at number 20, Michigan. And for Rutgers, Arthur Sitkowski was the starting quarterback. He went 17 for 24 for 106 yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions. Isaiah Pacheco had 10 carries for 23 yards, averaging 2.3 yards a carry, no touchdowns. He was their leading rusher. Raheem Blackshear was their leading receiver. He had 7 receptions for 55 yards, averaging just under 8 yards a catch, no touchdowns. As a team, they ran for only 46 total yards, and they only had 152 total yards of offense. For Michigan, different story. Shea Patterson went 17 of 23 for 276 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception, and Patterson also scored 3 touchdown runs on 4 carries. Christian Turner was their leading rusher, however. He had 11 carries for 48 yards, averaging 4.4 yards a carry and 1 touchdown. Ronnie Bell was their leading receiver. He had 6 receptions for 83 yards, averaging 13.8 yards a catch, no touchdowns. They had only 141 total rushing yards, but they did have 476 total yards of offense. Final score, Michigan 52, Rutgers 0. And for Michigan, this is exactly what you needed. This is exactly what you wanted after that embarrassing loss to Wisconsin, to come out and get a good win in here. And yes, I understand it's Rutgers, but at the same time, it's a conference win. It's a good confidence type of win, and something that can give them a lot of momentum going into their next few games. They've got Iowa next week, and like I said a few minutes ago, that should be a fantastic game to watch. The only thing about Michigan that still concerns me is their running game. They did not run that well today. I mean, Shea Patterson, I guess, ran for 3 touchdowns, but other than that, running-wise, they were under 100 yards, and they just did not run the ball that well. They didn't have under 100 rushing yards. They had their leading rusher was under 100 yards. They only had 141 yards. But yeah, they need to run the ball better, but that's pretty much it. Shea Patterson played pretty well. He's getting better. So we'll see how they do against Iowa, because that is a very good defense that they're going to be going up against. And that could be a very low-scoring game coming up. For Rutgers, I mean, you can't really go anywhere but up from here. I mean, Michigan's a good football team, but that was still pretty embarrassing. And they fired Chris Ash. Nunzio Campanile will be their interim head football coach for the rest of the season. And normally when that happens, I think the players might kind of take this as, okay, we're going to start a new season now with this new head coach. And we'll see how their mindset is with that. We'll see how they approach their next game. They play Maryland now, so we'll see how that game goes. And, I mean, you can't really go anywhere from up here. So if they could get a win against Maryland, I think that'd be good confidence-wise for Coach Campanile, and we'll see how they do. So not much to talk about this one overall. Rutgers, they're at the bottom right now, but that means that they are bound to go up at some point. And Michigan, they're going up, and they're playing better they're playing much better than they did last week. So we'll see how they do in the coming weeks. Now we've got the other team from Michigan. We've got Michigan State, number 25 ranked Michigan State, hosting Indiana. And for Indiana, Michael Penix Jr. had a great day. He went 33 for 42 for 286 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. Stevie Scott III was their leading rusher. He had 18 carries for 66 yards, averaging 3.7 yards a carry, no touchdowns. And Whop Phillier had 14 receptions for 142 yards. He was their leading receiver, averaging just over 10 yards a catch and 2 touchdowns. They only had 70 total rushing yards, but they did have 356 total yards of offense. For Michigan State, Brian Lewerke was 18 of 36 for 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. He was also their leading rusher. He had 12 carries for 78 yards, averaging 6.5 yards per carry and no touchdowns. And Darrell Stewart Jr. had 5 receptions for 117 yards, averaging 23.4 yards a catch and 2 touchdowns as well. They had 142 total rushing yards and 442 total yards of offense. The final score of this game, Michigan State 40, Indiana 31, and it was a closer game than that sounds. This was a very, very fun football game to watch. It was very back and forth, a lot of offense. I'll tell you about it. Michigan State scored first, Indiana answered, and then Michigan State scored again. Indiana answered them again, and Michigan State kept scoring. They went into halftime up 21-14. The start of the second half was a little slow. Indiana kicked a field goal, but that was the only thing that happened in the third quarter. And in the fourth quarter, Indiana took the lead on a touchdown pass, and then Michigan State answered and retook the lead 20-24. They kicked a field goal to go up 7, and then with 2 minutes left, Indiana scored a touchdown to tie it up at 31. Michigan State then drove down the field and kicked a field goal with 5 seconds left to take the lead 34-31. And then the final touchdown just came on the last play of the game when Indiana tried lateraling the ball a lot, and then they fumbled, and it got picked up by Michigan State. And they recovered in the end zone to go up 40-31. So yeah, a fantastic football game to watch. And I mean, for Michigan State, this is a good sign when you look at how their offense played. Indiana's defense isn't anything too special, but to score 40 points, or I guess technically 34 points on a Big Ten defense is a good thing, especially with how unproductive Michigan State's offense had been in the previous weeks, especially against their loss to Arizona State. So yeah, it's a very good win for them. They scored a lot of points. Defensively, I don't think anyone expected them to play, as poorly as they did, or for Indiana to play as well offensively as they did, because Michigan State has one of the better defenses in the Big Ten. But, at the same time, Indiana's offense is really, really starting to come together, especially with Penix at quarterback. He has played tremendously when he has. So, yeah, a good performance by Indiana. Almost came in to East Lansing and stole one from a ranked team on the road. That would have been a big win for them. So they should still have their heads held up high because it looked like that they gave their all. It's just, it came down to whoever had the ball last, and it was really Michigan State who did, and so they took advantage of that. So a good win for Michigan State. Next up, they're going to play Ohio State, and that'll be on Saturday Night Football, so we'll see how they do. Ohio State's looking fantastic right now. So we'll see how that game goes. For Indiana, they're going to play Rutgers next, so we'll see how that goes as well. We'll see if Indiana can pick up a win with that and what they'll do throughout the rest of the season, if their defense will improve, if their offense will stay how they are. But yeah, very, very good football game to watch. Michigan State, good win for them. Indiana, they played very well. They should have a positive outlook on it, and they'll get better. So yeah, that's all I have to say about that one. Next up, we've got Minnesota at Purdue, and this is a game that ever since I looked at the schedule in the summer, I was looking forward to watching, and it ended up turning out to be a pretty good game. For Minnesota, Tanner Morgan went 21 of 22 for 396 yards, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions. Rodney Smith had 22 carries for 115 yards. He was their leading rusher. He had 5.2 average, and he had 1 touchdown run. Rashad Bateman was their leading receiver. He had 6 receptions for 177 yards, averaging 29.5 yards a catch, and 2 touchdowns. They had only 92 total rushing yards, but they had 488 total yards of offense. For Purdue, Elijah Sindelar was back from his concussion. He got the start. He only went 4 of 8 for 46 yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions, because he got hurt again late in the first quarter. He hurt his left shoulder. So Jack Plummer came in for the rest of the game, and he was productive. He went 23 of 41 for 245 yards, 2 touchdowns, but also 2 interceptions. King Duaru was their leading rusher. He had 20 carries for 94 yards, averaging 4.7 yards a carry and 2 touchdowns. And David Bell was their leading receiver. He had 8 receptions for 114 yards, averaging 14.3 yards a catch, no touchdowns. they had 123 total rushing yards and 414 total yards of offense. The final score of this game, Minnesota won 38-31. And a good win for Minnesota. This is a very good win for them. I had been very hesitant about praising Minnesota for their 3 other wins because they had faced nobody, but they played very well on Saturday against Purdue. And I understand this is a very banged up Purdue team. They got even more banged up during the game. Sindelar got hurt early, and so did Rondale Moore. So he was not active during most of the game, which is a huge loss for them and a big gain for Minnesota throughout the game. But they played very well. Offensively, they played fantastic. Like I said, Tanner Morgan just went lights out. He was amazing. The Minnesota receivers played very well. It seemed like they were catching everything that was, thrown their way, which is true because he only had 1 completion. And that offense just looked like it could not be stopped. They were just unbelievable. And it was a pretty good game overall. Minnesota got an early big lead, and Purdue scored to make it close, but Minnesota just kept scoring, and they made it somewhat close to a blowout. The score was 38-17 at one point entering the fourth quarter, but then Purdue continued to fight. With 6 minutes left, they scored a touchdown. King Duru had a 2-yard run, and then with about 4 minutes left, Duru had a 13-yard touchdown catch from Jack Plummer. So Purdue fought, and that's one thing I'm going to say about Minnesota. If there's one thing they still need to improve on, it's probably finishing and not allowing, teams back in the game. But they're a good football team, and I'm willing to say it. They are. And they played very well against Purdue, and I did not think that they were going to play as dominantly as they had. I thought they might be able to win because of the injuries that Purdue had, but, Minnesota played great. For Purdue, man, you really got to feel it for them. This season has just not gone the way that a lot of people hoped. There were a lot of expectations heading into this year. And then, they dropped their first game to Nevada with a last-second field goal, and then for them to have all the injuries that they faced, Elijah Sindelar is going to be out next game, and so is Rondale Moore, and Purdue's going to be playing, let's see here, they're going to be playing Penn State on the road. So this schedule does not get easier for them. They got Penn State on the road, they play Maryland, but then they play at Iowa. So on the road, they've got some tough games coming up. And then they have to play at Northwestern and at Wisconsin after that. So it's not looking pretty good for Purdue right now. We'll see how they respond. We'll see how they deal with the injuries. And we'll see if more information about Rondale Moore and Elijah Sindelar come out. I am not exactly sure what their status is right now. All I know is they're not going to be playing against Penn State. So that is a big, big blow for Purdue. And Jeff Brom, he's a good football coach, and he's recruited decently well ever since he's been there. And I'm willing to say it. He got outcoached on Saturday by PJ Fleck, and PJ Fleck really prepared his guys, especially on the offense, for this game. And Purdue's defense hasn't been that great so far this year, but the track record over the past couple of years show that they have been. And I know they have a lot of injuries on defense as well, and they've lost some talent, but to put up 38 points on the road against Purdue, against a Jeff Brom coach team, that's pretty good. So I'm going to give that one to Minnesota. Great win for them. We'll see how they end up playing when they play, really good ranked opponents like Wisconsin and Penn State. They're 4-0 right now. They got Illinois coming up in their next game, and they got some pretty favorable games coming up. So Illinois at home, Nebraska at home after that. Then they play at Rutgers, and then at home against Maryland. So they've got some very winnable games coming up. But then they have to play Penn State, but that is going to be in Minneapolis. So we'll see about that. And then they have to play at Iowa, at Northwestern, and back home for the last game of the year against Wisconsin. And we'll see how it goes for them. So yeah, good win for Minnesota. They're looking pretty good right now. We'll see how they do next week. And they're looking to be on a good track record right now. And last but not least, we have the game that took place on Saturday Night Football. Number 5, Ohio State at Nebraska. For Ohio State, Justin Fields played very well. He was 15 of 21 for 212 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. Rushing-wise, he had 12 carries for 72 yards, averaging 6 yards a carry and a touchdown run. J.K. Dobbins was their leading rusher. However, he had 24 carries for 177 yards, averaging 7.5 yards a carry, no touchdowns though. Austin Mack actually was their leading receiver, not Chris Olave, not Benjamin Victor. He had 3 receptions for 66 yards, averaging 22 yards a catch, and a touchdown catch. They had 368 total rushing yards and 580 total yards of offense. For Nebraska, Adrian Martinez did not have a good game. He went 8 of 17 for only 47 yards, no touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Rushing-wise, he was their leading rusher. He had 15 carries for 81 yards, averaging 5.5 yards a carry, no touchdowns. Dedrick Mills and Maurice Washington were their 2 leading receivers. Both had only 10 yards. 10 yards receiving, both of them. They're tied for being leading receiver for Nebraska in that game. They had only 184 total rushing yards. I shouldn't say only 184 total rushing yards. That's decent. But they only had 231 total yards of offense. The final score of this game, Ohio State 48, Nebraska 7. Now, this isn't the biggest shocker to some people. I mean, for some, I can see why it would be, considering that it was the big Saturday night football game. College game day was in Lincoln. But, I mean, there were not a lot of great games against ranked opponents throughout the country on Saturday, so they were kind of stuck with this. Ohio State, oh, man, they handled their business, and I'm telling you, right now, they have a case to be the number 1 ranked team in the country. They really do. I mean, Clemson didn't play very well against North Carolina. Alabama won, and they moved to number 1. Georgia, the only team they've played is Notre Dame, and they played well, and they won that game. But really, Ohio State has just blown out everybody they've played. And I understand they haven't necessarily played anyone very good, but just looking at their productivity on the field, they're looking like one of the best teams, if not the best team in the country. So I think, if it wasn't for the fact that Clemson and Alabama play each other every year in the national championship, Ohio State could easily be ranked number 1 right now. And we'll see how they do in future games. And I said this earlier, I think that Ohio State-Penn State game is going to be fantastic to watch. Both teams are playing outstanding right now. It's just disappointing that we're not going to get that here for a while. But Ohio State plays Michigan State next, and that'll be Saturday Night Football in Columbus. And I'm pretty sure that they're going to be ready to handle business for that one too, and that should be a good win for them if they're able to win that game, which they should be. For Nebraska, they play Northwestern next. Northwestern's 1-3. They're 0-2 in the Big Ten right now. I don't know if they're going to start going on a winning streak like it seems like they do every October, but we'll see about that. So Nebraska plays Northwestern next. Right now they're favored by 8 points in that game, so they should be able to win it. But I'm not going to count out Northwestern. I think that even though they're very inexperienced, a very young football team, they could still, maybe find Nebraska's flaws and exploit them in the next game, and we'll see how that goes. So that should be a pretty good game to watch. But yeah, for Nebraska, they obviously have a lot of stuff to work on. They were very hyped up in the offseason, and I think it's very safe to say that they were overhyped because they just have not played very well. They beat Southern Alabama by only 14 points, blew a 17-0 lead against Colorado, and then they beat Northern Illinois. They beat not Indiana. They beat Illinois last week on the road, and then they got blown out by Ohio State. So there's nothing really too positive to look at from the way this season has gone so far. I mean, they're 3-2 right now, 1-1 in Big Ten play, and we'll see how they're gonna continue to grow throughout the season, and see if the productivity on the field is going to improve. But yeah, that's all I have to say about that one. All right, well, that does it for all the games here that we've got in Week 5 of Big Ten football recap. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. What do you guys think about any of the Big Ten teams? What do you think about any of the games that happened this weekend and any of the games that are going to be coming up in the future weeks? I really appreciate if you guys could leave a comment. Let me know your thoughts and inputs on it. Also, please leave a like on this video. It really means a lot. And subscribe to our channel and subscribe to our main SG1 Sports channel as well. I thank all of you guys so much for watching, and I hope you all have a great day.